So picture this. You are standing in a crowded, dimly lit venue. It's 1980s London.
Right.
And you didn't just buy a ticket to a rock show. You've actually walked into a ritual.
Yeah, a full-on experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The stage is flanked by these flickering, hypnotic video screens, and they're displaying jarring, almost subliminal imagery.
Oh, yeah.
And the music hitting you, I mean, it isn't a catchy melody. It's this absolute wall of industrial noise, literally designed to physically vibrate your chest cavity.
It's intense.
It really is. You aren't just an audience member tonight. You're a participant. So welcome to the world of psychic TV.
It sounds totally like a scene from, I don't know, a dystopian sci-fi film, doesn't it?
It really does.
But it is entirely real. We are talking about an entity that existed right on the bleeding edge of the counterculture for decades.
Yeah.
They challenged basically every single assumption we have about what constitutes art, how a society functions, and even the basic limits of human identity.
And that is our exact mission for this deep dive today. We are unpacking the complete history of this multimedia collective, formed in the UK in 1981, known as Psychic TV.
Yes, drawing from a really comprehensive historical column about the group.
Right. More specifically, we are exploring the boundary-shattering life of its central figure, Genesis P-Orridge. We really want to understand how this group blurred the lines between a band and like an actual spiritual community.
And why their decade-spanning experiments in art and magic are still echoing so loudly in the modern world today.
Exactly. So to understand the sheer ambition of Psychic TV, we really have to rewind a bit.
Yeah, we have to look at the mind of its creator. Because to understand Genesis P-Orridge, who lived from 1950 to 2020, by the way, you have to understand that simply playing music was never the actual goal.
Right. It was way bigger than that.
Oh, absolutely. Genesis was one of the most influential figures in the British avant-garde art world. And their roots in the 1970s actually began in a performance art group called COUM Transmissions.
Now, COEM Transmissions wasn't just doing typical theater, were they? Our source mentions they were heavily influenced by Fluxus. But what does that actually mean in practice?
So Fluxus was this experimental, radically anti-commercial art movement.
Okay.
The core mechanism of Fluxus is that it emphasizes the artistic process way over the finished product.
Right.
Imagine someone, not painting a picture to hang in a gallery, but turning the act of just throwing paint against a brick wall in an alleyway into the art itself.
I see. So it's about the action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
CUM Transmissions took that philosophy and developed performance art that was deeply provocative and visceral. It tackled heavy political themes in 1970s Britain, which was, a time of intense social unrest, strikes, and just general urban decay.
So Genesis is coming from this wild, provocative performance art background, looking around at this decaying, gray industrial landscape, and from there they form a group called Throbbing Gristle in 1976.
Yes, and Throbbing Gristle is widely recognized today as the pioneer of industrial music.
Wow.
But we need to understand why this music was so shocking at the time. I mean, before them, rock and roll was fundamentally based on blues scales, right? Guitars, bass, drums, standard song structure.
Sure, the classics.
Right. Well, Throbbing Gristle just threw all of that completely out the window. They utilized the literal sounds of the collapsing industrial age.
Like actual noise.
Yeah, harsh noise, tape loops of mechanical screeching, synthesizers that sounded like dying factories. And they did these guerrilla-style live performances. They replaced the blues scale with the sound of urban decay.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I like to think of traditional rock music as like a painted portrait, right? It has a clear subject, a frame, rules of perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What Genesis was doing with Throbbing Gristle was more like taking a sledgehammer to a mirror and arranging the shards so the audience is forced to look at distorted versions of themselves.
That is the perfect analogy. It really is. And they absolutely shocked the musical landscape. But eventually, in 1981, Throbbing Gristle disbanded.
Which brings us directly to the birth of Psychic TV.
Exactly. Genesis immediately forms this new collective, bringing along Peter Christopherson to handle video and sound, and Alex Ferguson on guitar.
But again, this wasn't just them starting a new band to hop in a van, go on tour, and sell records.
No, not at all. Psychic TV was explicitly designed not to be a mere music band. From day one, it was a multimedia collective.
Right.
If you listen to their very first track, Just Drifting, you hear this perfect encapsulation of their method. It combined the raw, street-level aggression of punk with the absolute freedom of 1960s psychedelia.
Layered over the experimental noise Genesis was already already known for.
Exactly. It defied conventional genre boundaries entirely.
And those live gigs we talked about at the beginning, they heavily used video equipment and multiple screens at a time when that was, incredibly difficult and expensive to do.
Oh, hugely expensive.
They were trying to turn the live performance into an ancient ritual, like fusing sound, imagery, and physical expression to give the audience a truly challenging experience.
And, when you treat a live show as a transcendent ritual, you naturally create a fiercely dedicated following.
That makes sense.
When you offer an audience an altered state of consciousness rather than just a catchy chorus to sing along to, the people who connect with it, well, they connect on a profound, almost primal level.
Right.
Psychic TV recognized this immense energy they were generating, but instead of establishing a traditional fan club to sell merchandise, they built an actual spiritual organization.
Wait, really?
Yeah. In 1981, right alongside the band, they founded the Temple of Psychic Youth, or TOPY.
Okay, hold on. I need to stop you there. Because when a rock star says they're starting a spiritual movement, 99% of the time, that is just a pretentious marketing gimmick to sell more T-shirts and VIP backstage passes.
Oh, absolutely.
So what makes TOPY an actual spiritual organization and not just a glorified, edgy fan club?
Well, it's a crucial distinction. To Genesis, the art and the spiritual practice were completely inseparable. TOPY was the ideological and ritualistic backbone of the band, and it demanded active participation.
All right.
It wasn't about passive consumption. The organization was rooted in something called chaos magic.
Chaos magic, which, that sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. How does chaos magic actually work in this context?
Right? It does sound wild. But chaos magic isn't about pulling rabbits out of hats or summoning literal demons. It is a highly psychological practice.
Okay.
It operates on the idea that belief itself is a tool. In traditional religion, you worship a specific deity permanently. But in chaos magic, you construct belief systems temporarily to achieve a specific altered state of mind or a specific goal.
Oh, wow. And then you just drop it.
Exactly. You discard that belief when you are done. TOPY members were given actual rituals to perform, like creating sigils. Yeah, which are symbols infused with personal intent, often involving physical elements like cutting hair or using bodily fluids. It was a network of people actively engaging in psychological self-hacking and philosophy.
I find myself really trying to map this onto the world you and I live in right now.
How do you mean?
Well, when you look at how modern internet fandoms operate today, the intense devotion, the shared inside languages, the almost cult-like community building around certain online creators, it feels like TOPY was predicting that kind of deep parasocial communal devotion.
Oh, that is a brilliant connection.
They just did it with analog mail and chaos magic decades before social media algorithms made it frictionless.
Exactly. They recognized early on that people were starving for connection and meaning, not just entertainment. So they built a decentralized network of independent thinkers.
Right.
But having built this incredibly dedicated cult-like community, Psychic TV faced a terrifying new challenge.
Which was?
How to keep them fed, how do you sustain that level of intense engagement? Their solution was an unprecedented explosion of content that absolutely tested the limits of musical production.
A productivity hack from hell, basically. Because in 1986, they launched this incredibly ambitious project where they decided they were going to release a live album every single month.
A live album every 30 days.
That is insane.
It is a staggering logistical and creative undertaking today, let alone in the 1980s analog era where you had to physically press vinyl.
Right.
Ultimately, this pressure cooker resulted in the release of 17 albums between 1986 and 1991.
They basically invented the modern subscription-based creator economy.
Yes.
It's like a 1980s Patreon. They risked total creative and physical burnout to feed their community a constant stream of content. But when you force yourself to write and release an album every month, your creative muscles either tear completely or they adapt.
And for Psychic TV, they adapted by mutating. When you are producing that much material, you cannot rely on the same sonic tricks. You can't just keep playing harsh industrial noise.
You'd run out of ideas.
Exactly. Their style fractured and absorbed everything around them. They brought in heavy elements of psychedelic music, straightforward pop, and deeply experimental electronic sounds.
Wow.
And out of this desperate need to experiment, they ended up heavily influencing the electronic music scene, almost as a prank.
Yes. Let's talk about Jack the Tab, because this is where the sheer chaotic brilliance of the group really shines. How exactly did they accidentally pioneer a genre they were trying to make fun of?
It is a phenomenal story. So in 1988, the acid house electronic music scene was exploding in the UK.
Right.
Genesis and Psychic TV wanted to prove that these electronic dance music genres were essentially just arbitrary formulas, that anyone could manufacture it.
Okay, so what did they do?
So they gathered in a studio, invented a bunch of fake DJ personas and imaginary bands, and engineered tracks using the exact sonic tropes of Chicago House.
The classic synthesizers and stuff.
Yeah, the squelching Roland TB-303 synthesizers, the repetitive four-on-the-floor beats. They released it as a compilation album called Jack the Tab, presenting it as a collection of various underground acid house artists.
But the entire album was literally just Psychic TV in different disguises.
Exactly, it was entirely fake. But here is the mechanism of why it mattered. Because they were such highly skilled avant-garde musicians, their parody tracks were technically superior to a lot of the real stuff out there.
Oh my gosh.
So this fake acid house compilation ended up being played in real underground clubs and heavily influenced the actual electronic music scene.
They reverse engineered a genre as a joke, and it was so good they accidentally became pioneers of it. I mean, that right there is the definition of chaos magic in action, using belief and formulas to literally alter reality.
Precisely. But, you cannot build a massive countercultural cult based on chaos magic, ritualistic sex, and anti-establishment philosophy in the late 80s and early 90s without eventually kicking the hornet's nest of mainstream society.
Yeah, there is always a backlash.
In 1992, the establishment finally bit back, and it bit hard.
Right. And just to be clear for you listening, whenever we look at the history of the counterculture, the source material often highlights this recurring pattern of moral panics.
Yeah.
And we're just reporting what the sources say here. We aren't taking any sides.
Of course.
But the pattern is clear. The mainstream encounters art or lifestyles it fundamentally fails to understand, and its immediate reaction is to criminalize it. So in 1992, Psychic TV became the target of a massive scandal via a television news broadcast.
Yeah, this was a documentary aired by Channel 4 in the UK, and we have to view this in the context of the satanic panic that was sweeping the Western world at the time.
Right, that period of widespread hysteria.
Exactly, where people genuinely believed secret cults were performing ritual abuse. The Channel 4 broadcast aired heavily edited footage from an art film that Genesis had been involved with, and they framed it as actual, literal evidence of satanic ritual abuse.
They took avant-garde performance art and told the public it was real violence. Which, if you think about how misinformation spreads on the internet today, how out-of-context video clips can summon a digital mob to destroy someone's life in an afternoon, it is chillingly familiar.
It really is.
Except this wasn't just a digital mob. This broadcast triggered a very real police investigation.
It did. Scotland Yard police actually raided the home of Genesis and their family. They seized tons of personal archives, art, diaries, and videotapes.
That's terrifying.
Now, Genesis happened to be in Nepal on a relief mission when the raid occurred, but facing the very real threat of being arrested for crimes that were entirely fabricated by a media panic, Genesis made the decision to go into self-exile.
Wow.
They relocated to the United States and did not return to the UK for years.
An impartial look at the history shows us how dangerous that intersection of provocative art and mainstream fear can be. I mean, a TV station completely misrepresents a piece of underground art, and suddenly an artist's entire life in their home country is dismantled.
It's a stark reminder of the material risks involved when you intentionally live on the fringes.
Yeah.
But survival through evolution was practically Genesis's defining trait. While in exile in America, the original iteration of Psychic TV officially disbanded in 1999.
But they didn't stop working.
No, Genesis immediately launched a new project called The Majesty, which focused heavily on spoken word, poetry, and the manipulation of language. It was a way to keep the artistic drive alive through a totally different medium.
You can exile the artist, and you can seize their videotapes.
Yeah.
But you cannot permanently silence that drive to cross boundaries,
Right.
because just a few years later, there's a rebirth. In 2003, the collective was revived under the banner of PTV3.
Yes, PTV3 brought in fresh collaborators, most notably the drummer and designer Edley O'Dowd. They picked right back up, integrating video, sound, and performance, but with a renewed, highly conceptual focus.
Right.
They released albums with titles like Hell is Invisible, Heaven is Here, and Mr. Alien Brain versus the Skinwalkers, and the 2016 album Alienist. But while PTV3 was touring and creating, Genesis was also embarking on what is arguably their most profound and ultimate artistic project.
You're talking about the physical transformation, the concept of Pandrogyny.
Exactly. This is where Psychic TV's legacy regarding identity becomes incredibly significant. Genesis had fallen deeply in love with an artist named Lady J,
Okay.
and together they decided that romantic love shouldn't just be an emotional bond, it should be an actual physical merger.
What do you mean a physical merger?
They launched the Pandrogyny Project. They underwent a series of identical plastic surgeries, matching breast implants, identical facial feminization and masculinization procedures, matching tattoos.
Oh, wow. So they were surgically altering themselves to look exactly like each other.
Yes. The goal was to abandon their individual identities entirely and become a single, unified entity they called a Pandrogyne, named Breyer P-Orridge.
That is profound.
They viewed the human body not as a fixed, absolute truth determined at birth, but as just another medium for artistic and spiritual expression. It was the ultimate breakdown of boundaries. They were actively living out conversations about the fluidity of gender and physical identity decades before those topics entered mainstream cultural discourse.
It fundamentally reframes how we have to look at them.
Yeah.
I mean, we started this conversation talking about a band that played industrial noise,
Right.
but the Pandrogyny Project proves they were so much more than that. They weren't just making challenging music. They were literally reconstructing what it means to be a human being.
Truly. But sadly, Lady J passed away suddenly in 2007.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
And later, in 2017, Genesis publicly announced a chronic leukemia diagnosis, which slowed down the PTV3 touring machine. And solemnly, Genesis Breyer P-Orridge passed away on March 14th, 2020, at the age of 70.
Wow.
Their death really brought the physical existence of the Psychic TV collective to an end.
So, after unpacking all of this, the performance art, the chaos magic, faking acid house genres, surviving moral panics, and the incredible physical commitment of Pandrogyny, what does this all actually mean for you listening right now?
It's a lot to take in.
It is. If we look at the world today, what would you say is the tangible footprint that Psychic TV left behind?
Their legacy is monumental because it operates on so many different frequencies. Musically, you cannot look at modern industrial techno or experimental electronic music without seeing their fingerprints.
Right.
They proved that you could fuse abrasive noise with dance floor euphoria and deep philosophical intent. Culturally, they popularized chaos magic and esoteric spirituality, giving misfits a framework to build their own communities completely outside of traditional religion.
Which is huge.
But most importantly, through projects like Pandrogyny, they expanded the vocabulary of human identity. They showed us that the limits of who you are, your gender, your body, your social role, are negotiable.
They took the boundaries between music, magic, and physical reality, and they simply refused to acknowledge them. They built a world entirely on their own terms.
And that leads to a really fascinating thought for you to consider. Genesis P-Orridge used the absolute cutting-edge mediums of their time analog video synthesizers, underground cassette trading, physical mail order networks to orchestrate their chaos magic and build an intensely loyal community.
Yeah, they used every tool they had.
So if a visionary like that were a young artist starting out today in an era of artificial intelligence, deepfakes, algorithmic social media, and virtual reality, what modern technology or platform do you think they would use to orchestrate their chaos magic and reconstruct our reality?
Oh, it is an incredible question. How would they hack the algorithms we live by today? We want to thank you for joining us in this deep dive. Stay insanely curious, keep questioning the invisible boundaries around you, and remember, sometimes the loudest noise is exactly what you need to wake up. Until next time.